History is a tapestry woven with shadows and whispers. What if the greatest stories remain untold, hidden in plain sight? Please like, share, and subscribe. This season, we expose the forgotten, dissect the myths, and confront the conspiracies that shaped our world. Prepare for Histories, Mysteries, and Conspiracies Season 3.
The Last Reset. How one family reshaped American education, medicine, and law. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Between roughly 1880 and 1913, a single family quietly restructured the three most consequential systems in American life: how citizens are educated, how they are healed, and how they are governed by law. The name was Rockefeller. This is not a story of conspiracy in the theatrical sense. It is documented in foundation records, congressional hearings, published reports, and the stated words of the men involved. What makes it remarkable is not that it was hidden. Much of it was announced openly, but that so few people have read what was actually said. The Rockefeller influence on American institutions did not happen by accident. It was deliberate, sequential, and extraordinarily effective. Education came first, medicine followed. The legal system completed the architecture. Each system reinforced the others, and together they produced a population shaped, in the words of the men who built these systems, to yield with perfect docility to those in control. What follows is not an argument, it is a record. The sources speak for themselves. In 1902, John D. Rockefeller founded the General Education Board with a public mission to promote education without distinction of race, sex, or creed. But internal documents, particularly Frederick T. Gates's Occasional Letter No. 1, reveal a much more calculating objective. In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive rural folk. In 1902, John D. Rockefeller established the General Education Board, GEB, with an initial donation that would eventually total approximately $180 million, equivalent to several billion dollars today. The GEB was chartered by the United States Congress in 1903 with the stated mission of promoting education throughout the country without distinction of race, sex, or creed. That was the public mission. The internal mission, expressed in the board's own foundational documents, told a different story. Frederick T. Gates, Rockefeller's personal advisor and the operational architect of the GEB, wrote the following in the board's Occasional Letter No. 1. In our dream, we have limitless resources, and the people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hand. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and, unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or of science. We are not to raise up from among them authors, orators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo-great artists, painters, musicians, nor will we cherish even the peculiar genius of mechanic that rises to find beauty and inspiration in the common work of the craftsman's life. We have not to raise up from among them authors, orators, poets. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into men of learning or philosophers. This was not a private memo leaked after the fact. It was a foundational document of the organization itself. Gates was explicit. The purpose of the GEB was not to produce thinkers, artists, scientists, or independent minds. It was to produce a compliant, responsive population. What the reform actually did. Prior to the Rockefeller intervention, American education was decentralized and varied. One-room schoolhouses, local curricula, and community-controlled schools were common, especially in rural areas. Students were taught classical subjects, rhetoric, independent reasoning, and practical trades determined by their communities. The GEB systematically standardized and centralized this system. Through targeted funding, Rockefeller money shaped which schools survived and which did not. Schools that adopted the board's preferred curriculum received funding. Those that did not were gradually defunded or absorbed. The result was a national curriculum increasingly oriented toward producing workers for industrial employment, rather than citizens capable of independent civic thought. Vocational training was emphasized for working class and Black communities in particular. critical thinking, classical education, and rhetorical training were progressively sidelined. By the time the GEB closed in 1964, it had distributed over $325 million and helped reshape American public education from the ground up. The standardized, compliance-oriented system it helped build remains the structural foundation of American schooling today. From the classroom, this pipeline of American education moved into the medical school, where Abraham Flexner and the General Education Board gained control of what Americans would be taught about their own bodies. The same logic that produced compliant citizens produced compliant patients. Once the General Education Board had established control over the pipeline of American education, determining what future professionals would learn and how they would think, the next logical step was the medical school. Abraham Flexner, who wrote the foundational letter for the GEB, was the same man commissioned to evaluate American medical education in 1910. The overlap was not coincidental. It was architectural. The same hand that shaped how Americans were taught to think then shaped what Americans were taught about their own bodies. The 1910 Flexner Report, funded by Carnegie and Rockefeller, transformed medical education. It mandated a pharmaceutical-based model, closing medical schools that focused on traditional or alternative practices. Rockefeller then profited by creating a drug market for his petrochemical byproducts. Prior to 1910, medicine in America was a diverse field. There were allopaths, homeopaths, naturopaths, eclectics, and herbalists, all practicing side by side with varying philosophies. However, John D. Rockefeller and other industrialists wanted to streamline medicine toward a pharmaceutical-based model. In the early 20th century, American medicine was genuinely pluralistic. Alongside conventional allopathic physicians, there were homeopaths, osteopaths, naturopaths, eclectic physicians, and practitioners of herbal and traditional medicine. Many of these traditions had long histories and substantial patient followings. This pluralism was a problem, not for patients, but for anyone seeking to consolidate and control the medical marketplace. In 1910, the Flexner Report was released, funded by the Carnegie Foundation and Rockefeller Philanthropies. It transformed medical education in America by shifting practitioners toward a pharmaceutical model, while systematically closing schools that taught diverse or traditional medicine. In 1910, the Carnegie Foundation, operating in close coordination with the Rockefeller Philanthropies, published what became known as the Flexner Report, Medical Education in the United States and Canada. Written by Abraham Flexner, the report evaluated 155 medical schools across the country. The report's stated purpose was to raise standards. Its practical effect was to establish a single model of medicine, pharmaceutical, laboratory-based, and aligned with what Flexner called scientific medicine, as the only legitimate form of medical practice in America. Schools that did not meet Flexner's criteria, which were closely aligned with the German university model funded by Rockefeller interests, were recommended for closure. The consequences were sweeping. Of the approximately 155 medical schools evaluated, more than half closed within years of the report's publication. 5 of 7 black medical colleges were shut down. Schools teaching homeopathy, naturopathy, eclectic medicine, and other traditions were systematically defunded and eventually eliminated from the American medical landscape. The reform brought about the direct or indirect elimination of the irregular sectarian practitioners and the minority groups such as black and women from the medical marketplace. Rockefeller's Standard Oil at that time was already beginning to look into the market of petrochemical byproducts for drug development. The transformation of medical practice into a pharmaceutical-dependent system directly created a massive new market for his empire. What the Flexner Report is rarely discussed alongside is Standard Oil. By 1910, John D. Rockefeller's petroleum empire had produced an enormous surplus of coal tar derivatives, petrochemical byproducts with no profitable use. The emerging science of synthetic pharmacology offered a solution. These byproducts could be the basis of a new class of drugs. The medical school reform Rockefeller funded through the GEB and Carnegie Foundation had a direct commercial consequence. By eliminating competing medical traditions and establishing pharmaceutical, laboratory-based medicine as the only legitimate practice, Rockefeller simultaneously created the market for the products his other enterprises were positioned to supply. The American Medical Association, restructured during this same period, became the licensing and accreditation authority that enforced these standards. Physicians who practiced outside the approved pharmaceutical model risked losing their licenses. The gatekeeping mechanism was now institutionalized. Natural medicine, herbal traditions, and non-pharmaceutical approaches to healing, many of which had centuries of documented use, were not disproven. They were simply regulated out of existence. From the clinic to the courtroom, a population shaped to comply and a medical system shaped to profit required one more element to become self-sustaining: a legal system that protected the architecture from challenge. Law was the final room in the structure. It did not need to be built from scratch. It needed to be shaped. Foundation funding for law schools, the standardization of legal education, and eventually the direct legislative power of the Rockefeller family through elected office completed what education and medicine had started. The Rockefeller family did not invent American corruption. They did not single-handedly destroy American education, medicine, or law. History is never that simple, and the men involved held views, some genuine, some self-serving, that do not reduce to a single motive. But the documented record is clear about what happened. Between 1880 and 1913, one family and its associated philanthropic foundations made deliberate, funded, and largely successful efforts to reshape the three systems that most directly govern how Americans think, how they heal, and how they are governed. The education system they helped build was explicitly not designed to produce independent thinkers. The medical system they funded was structured to eliminate competition and align with their petrochemical interests. The legal framework that followed protected both. These are not interpretations. They are in the documents. They are in the foundation records. They are in the congressional testimony and the published reports and the words of the men who built these systems. What those men called philanthropy, history might more accurately call architecture. The structure they built is still standing. Most Americans live inside it without knowing who designed it or why. The question that remains, and that this document does not pretend to answer, is what you do when you understand the blueprint of the house you're living in.
Bravo. Select an option for more.